Welcome to Virtuoso. I'm William Intriligator, the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra's music director and conductor. And joining me today is our violinist, Lindsie Katz. Welcome, Lindsie.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, it's so nice to have this opportunity to get to know you better and to hear you perform all on your own.
Yeah.
You're a relative new member of the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Let's see. Well, both my parents are musicians, so I started violin at age 5, 6-ish. My dad's a violinist, my mom's an oboist, so it's kind of all in my family all the time. um, and let's see. I was born in Chicago, and then when I moved to Boulder, Colorado, when I was 9, and I joined Boulder Suzuki Strings, and I
Great.
had great experiences all through my senior year. I took with the same teacher all those years, 9 years. Her name was Kathy Leidig, and she was amazing, amazing teacher. Group classes and youth orchestra and all of that. So um, it was a great way to grow up with the violin.
I bet.
Um, yeah, and
Wonderful. And in Boulder, too, such a beautiful
yeah,
place to grow up, too.
yeah, it's really beautiful.
So, and by the way, are your parents still performing?
Yes, sort of. So, well, my dad is. So he now lives in South Carolina, and he plays with kind of all orchestras and teaches and all around there. Um, and my mom, yes, she still performs, but she's now actually the executive director of the Ars Nova Singers. So she's um, basically mostly focused on that. And then my stepdad, actually, he's also a musician. Surprise, surprise,
Oh,
surprise.
yeah.
He also plays oboe. My mom and him met at oboe camp many years ago.
Oh,
So,
that's so funny.
and he actually teaches at CU Boulder. He's the wellness program director. He does Alexander Technique and still teaches some oboe students. So,
Fantastic.
yeah, yep,
That's so great.
yeah.
So, and then did you end up going to CU Boulder for your undergrad?
Not for my undergrad, but I did go for my master's. For my undergrad, I went to St. Olaf College in Minnesota, very small liberal arts college. Yeah,
It's
it's
funny that just the very last person we had on Virtuoso, Jennifer Lyford, our violinist, who's the,
oh,
she's our third chair violin. She was playing
yeah,
associate concertmaster on this last concert.
yeah.
She went there.
Oh, I didn't know that. I need to
That's
talk
so
to her.
funny.
That is so
And
funny.
the amazing thing is that you probably both had Steve Amundsen, is that he's been there forever, and he's a
Yes.
wonderful director of orchestras
Yeah.
and composer too, and a
Yeah.
friend of mine from way,
Oh,
way back. Yeah,
hmm. Yeah, he's wonderful. He's one of the reasons I fell in love with orchestra. So
yes, he absolutely is great, and he has that effect on so many of his undergraduate students at
he
St.
really does.
When I was living in Minneapolis, I lived there in the 90s for 7 years.
Oh, cool.
I was very fortunate to get to conduct an orchestra called the Metropolitan Symphony that he,
Oh, really? I
yeah,
also played in that for a few years when I after I graduated. So
that's so funny. Yeah,
that's
when I was there,
funny.
Bill Strickle, who's their conductor now, was the
Yeah.
associate conductor, and then I said, you should just let him be the.
Yeah. So cool. Such
Yeah,
a
that
small world.
just started with Steve. He
Oh,
started it with a
wow.
bunch of St. Olaf alums. So,
Cool.
well,
Yeah.
that's so neat. It's a small world.
It's very small.
Wow. And so you went from there, and then maybe after a few years, you staying in the Twin Cities area, maybe then
Yeah.
you Boulder.
Yeah, so after I graduated from St. Olaf, I moved to Minneapolis for a few years, and I taught and I gigged and I nannied and I worked at a cafe, did all the things. I was ready for a break, but I was applying to schools in between, and that was my plan. And I ended up going to CU to study with Professor Rhodes and then also Professor Gutierrez. So yeah, it was a really great experience there too. So.
Fantastic.
Hmm.
And are you finished now with a master's?
Yeah, I graduated in 2019, so a year and a half ago now. So,
Congratulations.
yeah, thanks.
Now today you're going to be performing on a little bit different instrument. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm going to be playing Heinrich Bieber's Passacaglia for Baroque violin, and it's one of the 16 pieces of the Mystery Sonatas. And let's see, I started playing Baroque violin actually pretty young, but I never really studied it for real until recently. My teacher growing up, Kathy, who I mentioned earlier, was modern and Baroque violinist. She played with the Baroque Chamber Orchestra, or sorry, yeah, Baroque Chamber Orchestra of Colorado, BCOC, which I actually now play with too.
Oh, great.
um, so she kind of just the way she taught and the things that she would just talk about were very Baroque oriented, like bringing out the not the Suzuki Bach, but the real manuscript Bach, that kind of stuff. So she just kind of instilled in me this real love for Baroque music. And I mean, I love all kinds of music, of course, but there's something about Baroque and classical specifically that really touches my heart, and I get so excited about it. So I played in the BCOC like high school group. It was called Baroque con Brio with a friend of mine who actually now lives in Holland, and she's a Baroque violinist. She went to The Hague and studied and everything. And then I studied a little bit in college at St. Olaf. I played with the Collegium Musicum. And I took some lessons with a Baroque violinist in Minneapolis. And then when I went to CU, I played in the early music ensemble, which we use modern instruments but Baroque bows. Um, and that just and the new-ish harpsichord teacher who's the director of the program had just moved from Germany, and he's director there, so I got to work with him really closely. And the year before, Elizabeth Farr too, she was really great. So after that, I kind of just basically was like, I need to really look into this. So I started doing some summer music programs. There's one really great one in Toronto, and it's called the Tafelmusik Summer Baroque Institute, and it's open to anybody. Even if you don't have experience on the instrument, they provide instruments. So I went 2 years in a row, and I'm now studying with online, of course, one of the violinists of Tafelmusik. So
Wonderful.
yeah, it was kind of a long-winded way of saying all
That's
that, but
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm curious, when you played in the BCOC high school ensemble, when you were still
yeah.
in high school, obviously that was probably just with your regular modern instrument,
It
right?
actually wasn't. Yeah, they gave us Baroque violins and stuff, and it's very different. So
I know it is. Well, that what a great opportunity as a high school player to
yeah,
have that experience. I mean, that's rare, and
yeah, it's very rare.
really wonderful that they provide that to a high school musician. And
Yeah,
I could see that maybe that was one of the things that, planted the seed early on where you really love it. So
yeah,
I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about the differences between modern violin and Baroque violin, but
yeah, sure.
I want you to break it into two different like conversations. One, for the lay people who might be watching Virtuoso, who aren't even musicians, but they come to our concerts and they love classical music.
Mhm.
Maybe you can explain a little bit to them about some of the differences, and then later maybe to some of the other musicians who are watching this, because we have a lot of our Cheyenne Symphony members and other musicians from around. Really, this program might be seen from musicians all over the world. Who knows? So, maybe then getting into a little bit more technical specifics if you want, just about some of the differences. So, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, well, I should probably get out the violin just so you can see some differences too, because that is a pretty obvious one. Um, so the I will talk about just a couple main differences. So one of them is that the sound is really different because we use different kinds of strings. Modern strings are made out of steel, and Baroque strings are made out of gut, so like sheep gut or beef gut. So they're a very different kind of more raw, warm sound. And that also affects how the strings resonate and make sound. So they weren't meant to be projected into a big concert hall. They were more for like intimate settings and also resonating sort of in a bubble like. I guess that's how I think think of it as a bubble like form, I guess, and also in cathedrals. So um, so you can even see, I'll just bring it up really close. So the strings are more yellow because they're made out of gut, except for the last string. And then the other thing that you can see is that I don't have a chin rest or a shoulder rest. I use little pads. They're actually makeup pads. They work very well. And the fingerboard's a little bit shorter. And so those are the main differences on the violin. And then the bow is also quite different. I'll show you right here. So the tip looks really different. It's much longer and pointier. And the way it's shaped, you can't really see this too well, but the way it's shaped is more like this instead of a modern, which is shaped like that. Modern bows are really meant to create sustaining, really even sounds. And Baroque bows were more meant to create dance-like gestures and lots of different sounds in a very short amount of time. So those are the main differences, I guess technically on the violin and bow, but also musically. And
well, Lindsie, maybe you could explain how you hold it in a different.
yeah. So I'll just show you, I guess. So modern violin is very sort of set very out over here and in sort of one position. Baroque violin is much more inwards because since we don't have a shoulder rest, we have to rest it on our collarbone to find the fulcrum, which means that when we play, we have to move a lot more actually. Not only because of how the violin is set up, but also because of how we have to make sound. So it doesn't work to make sound if we just do this. Not that modern is that simple, of course, but it's a lot to get the strings to resonate the way they need to and are designed to. You have to sort of make a lot of circles, basically. So lots of rainbows and circles, which is why if you've ever seen a Baroque orchestra play, you see a lot of bouncing. And that's not only just because the people are bouncy people, that's because that is literally how you make sound. Otherwise, it kind of makes, I'll do a little demonstration. It kind of makes this sort of squeaky, kind of yucky sound if you don't really know that you need to do that. So it's sounds fine, but as soon as you know about the rainbow thing, then it makes this, it sort of swells. Yeah. Those are called messa di voces. They're just swells of sound.
The exact same term they use in vocal music when a singer swells on the same syllable and it has a crescendo on that. It's that same messa di voce. Exactly.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, great introduction. You know, some people who are not musicians may be surprised to realize that the violin itself, aside from the strings and the fingerboard, is otherwise identical. But let's not forget that many of the greatest violins that are still being performed today are from that Baroque era.
Yes, exactly.
So when we talk about Stradivari and Guadagnini and all these others, those go back to the era of Baroque music.
Yeah.
So, there is something so special about Baroque music. Is there any way I could put you on the spot to maybe just articulate a little bit more in words what it is that you love about it?
Well, there are so many different kinds, I guess. That's one. But I think it's partly just the sound that the instruments create. There's something so grounding about it for me, and intimate, I guess. And I also find the music just really interesting, and maybe that's just because I'm a nerd and I really like looking information up and finding new things out about stuff that's old. Yeah, it's really also about there were so many things that were not written down, and from a modern perspective, we could look at that music and be sort of interpret it like, well, that's not written, so we have to play it, the same. But actually, there were so many conventions that people just knew. And so composers didn't really have to write them down. And also because publishing was really expensive, ink was really expensive, all of that. So they didn't write as much down as we do now. So all the things that people just knew they
Yeah.
would perform that way.
Right.
So kind of, yeah, and finding out about that kind of stuff and um, doing more research on even just, specific composers, I really enjoy that.
Yeah.
Um, and then actually more specifically, um, I'm sure a lot of people know this term, but I don't think we really use it very much nowadays, and it really, really helps. Um, so there's a term called affect, and essentially what that means is the kind of character or mood that we're trying to portray. And um, what I have found in just my own study and performing is that it's not really enough to just say, okay, this character is mysterious. This is, this they're mad here or feeling joyful. It's more about the affect, and what these composers and in the Baroque era were trying to convey was a much more um, rounded experience than that. So it wasn't just like the emotion, but it was all the senses that were happening too. And that's what actually makes the music come alive for me, specifically on the Baroque instrument, is all of a sudden, if you can, I'll tell you about a specific affect. So, like sorrow, for instance, but a specific moment that you felt sorrow, and then actually letting yourself feel that, all of a sudden just makes everything make sense. And you can just sort of answer technical questions, and you can understand how one phrase transitions into another phrase. And it's just amazing. So, affect, that term, it like changed my life essentially.
Brilliant. I love that. That's inspiring to me. I like
Yeah.
that your description of it was so wonderful. I also brought to mind the idea that um, nowadays, when music is so easily published um, and self-published, I should say, and that composers really have in mind that they're writing for posterity. But
Mm-hmm.
back then, they didn't have that in mind. Baroque
Yeah.
composers were writing fresh music all the time, and they
Mm-hmm.
frequently, the idea of making sure that everything was in the music so that future generations could know how to perform it, that was way not in their mind at all,
Yeah.
because everything they performed was new, and
Yep.
they were constantly doing new things. And then they were in a hurry to get this new music written, and sometimes
Yeah.
they didn't even have time to write it all down.
Yeah,
All
exactly.
those details. So that was another aspect of it too.
Totally.
Just a different. It was different then,
Yeah. Very
Um, well, I can't wait to hear you play this. Is there anything more specific about the piece that you want to tell us about the Bieber?
Yeah, so this piece is really special. So, like I said earlier, it's a group of 16 pieces, and 15 of those pieces, the first 15, are based on the mysteries of the Rosary,
Oh,
and which are the events in the life of Mary and Jesus. And I'm not religious or anything, but somehow these pieces evoke the sense of spirituality that I don't really feel with anything else. And it just feels, I feel so connected to myself and the rest of the world, and I think especially now that's so important. Um, and I think that's particularly why, like during COVID times, I've really worked on the Passacaglia, the 16th piece. Um, and I'll go back to that in a second, but just more background about the piece. So it's separated into three sections. The first section is the first five, which is the joyful mysteries. The second section, the next five, is the sorrowful mysteries, and then the last five are the glorious mysteries. And then the Passacaglia is the last one. And so obviously in their names, they sort of tell you what they represent. Um, and the thing, one of the things that's really cool about these pieces is that every single one except for the first one and the last one, the Passacaglia, are in different kinds of tuning. So what we call scordatura, which technically means mistuning. And I won't go into the details about that because it's complicated. You just, tune your strings in different ways. And Bieber wrote them at the beginning of the piece to tell you how to tune each string. And I haven't played a lot of those yet because it's really complicated. just, technically, but also tuning wise and all of that. But I'm really excited to get into those. Um,
We have a few famous examples of scordatura in the orchestral literature as well, as I'm sure you know. The Dance
yeah.
Macabre is the most famous
Yes.
by
Yep.
Cecil.
The E goes down. Yep.
Down to an E flat to create
Yep.
the Devil's Triad,
Yes.
flat tritone. And then Mahler's Fourth Symphony has an incredible concertmaster solo in which the entire solo and the entire movement is scordatura. And
Hmm.
it creates a very different effect, and not just fingerings, but the sound is so different
Yeah.
in scordatura as well.
Yeah.
And so few composers wrote for it in an orchestral setting, but there are a few.
Hmm.
And it must be so different to be playing a fingering in a normal place and hear a different note. It must be so
Yeah. Kind
off.
of messes with you a little bit.
It messes with your mind, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now
Um,
you're not going to play any of the scordatura. You're doing just the final
just
passacaglia.
the final Passacaglia. Um, Mostly because, I'm working on other stuff too, and tuning, constantly changing your tuning is a bit tricky. um, and plus, the Passacaglia is also the most famous one. And it's also nicknamed the guardian angel, and I just felt like that was really great for what the
Right.
times that we're in right now.
Drawing
So
on. That's fun.
yeah, yeah, and it's one of my favorite ones anyway. And yeah, I guess I could talk a little bit about like how I view the piece.
Sure.
So it's the only one, first of all, that is completely solo violin. So all the other ones have what we call continuo teams. So like you can kind of choose what combination of instruments you want to support you. So like a harpsichord, a cello, an organ. You can kind of choose one or all three, or mix and match basically depending on how you're interpreting that specific piece. But the Pascalia is the only one with just solo violin, and I have talked a lot with my teacher about this, and she put out an amazing CD with all of them. I don't know how many years ago. If you want to look that up, by the way, her name is Julia Wedman. Just look up Bieber Mystery Sonatas.
Mystery Sound.
She's
For
incredible.
Biber, yes.
Yeah, Biber, not the pop singer. um,
Oh, I didn't even think about that. So
yeah,
your teacher's last name starts with a W?
yeah, Wedman, Wedman, and she's one of the violinists in Toffel Music Baroque Orchestra. So, um, yeah, so I've had quite a few lessons with her on this piece, and she is a very deep thinker, and so we've talked a lot about what it means to both of us, and I mean, I could talk forever about this, but essentially, um, thinking about the guardian angel, we sometimes notice our guardian angels, and sometimes we don't. We're just sort of going along, and then we notice them again, and then we don't. So it's kind of a sort of circular going in and out of life, I guess. This is getting very philosophical.
Yeah.
so and just the Passacaglia anyway is just a ground bass that repeats. So it starts with bum 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 bum, and then continues with different variations. So sometimes it's just those notes by themselves without any double stops or chords. And then sometimes there's just a lot of crazy stuff. There's one part in particular that reminds me of like angels' wings fluttering.
Oh, wonderful.
So there's just a lot of different things that come in and out of this piece. So it's really really special, and um, Bieber's writing is incredible and very virtuosic, and not just because of the scordatura, but just all the kinds of technical things that he would write. Not a lot of composers were experimenting to that extent,
Yeah.
but so it would have been very cool to meet him.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people aren't as familiar with, Bieber,
Yep.
Buddha, as they are with Bach, Handel, and Vivaldi.
Yeah.
That
Hmm.
these are really important Baroque composers. It's wonderful to hear their music and make sure that they're
Yeah.
represented. And I mean, some of them are fantastic. I have to admit, I've never heard the Mystery Sonata, so I can't wait
Really?
to hear this.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would definitely recommend looking up Julie's CD. It's incredible. You'll want to listen from beginning to end multiple times in one day. So,
Oh, I love
yeah.
that kind of thing. I mean, I'm a big fan of that whole Tafel music,
Mhm.
and I love those recordings that they've
Mhm.
had, and so many different composers whose names I never heard of,
Yeah,
and things.
very
And
cool.
it's just fantastic. Of course, lots of Telemann and lots of Bach
Mhm.
things too. But all right, well, let's just get right into it. Unless there's anything else you wanna mention.
I don't think so. Yeah, it's pretty good background.
That was great. Thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah,
So
you're
this is
welcome.
Lindsie Katz performing Bieber's Passacaglia from the Mystery Sonatas. Bravo, Lindsay. I can't wait to hear it actually. And I'm giving you an early bravo because I'm sure it sounds amazing.
Thank
And
you.
you're the only one so far on this program who's been willing to play Baroque violin. And I think maybe you're just going to start a trend. Maybe there'll be other people who want to play other kinds of instruments other than what they normally play in the Cheyenne Symphony.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thank you so much. I mean, yeah, really special. And what you were telling us about your own interpretation about the piece, I'm sure that's really helped people as they listen to it.
Yeah.
Remind me, this is your very first season with us, isn't it? With the Cheyenne Symphony?
Yeah, so I subbed a few times last year, but this is my first year as a member, so I'm
Oh, we're
excited
so
to
happy to
be
have
here.
you.
Yeah, thanks.
Play in other orchestras in the Front Range, or
Yeah, just a couple actually. So Cheyenne, obviously, and Boulder Chamber Orchestra I've played with a few times, and but the other main one is the Baroque Orchestra, so Baroque Chamber Orchestra of Colorado, and then other gigs here and there. But and I also teach. I have about well, COVID has changed things, but I have about 16 students now. So
oh, a lot.
um,
Wow.
yeah, so do kind of the typical musician thing, mix and
Yes.
match.
Are all those lessons over Zoom now?
Most of them, yes. Now we're sort of getting back into in person, but with all the safety measures and
Yeah.
everything. So,
Wearing masks and being distant. Yeah.
yep, yep.
It's been tough. What was it like for you in the early days, like in March and April and everything like that, when so many opportunities shut down and everything? What were you playing still every day at home? And
Um, Not every day, but that actually, I it's not like I'm like, yay, COVID, but COVID did give me a chance to really work on Baroque violin more. Because it's actually really hard to switch back and forth, especially if you haven't really studied Baroque violin. So I was really working on Baroque a lot, and so now I feel way more comfortable with it. Um, but yeah, early days of COVID, I mean, they're still kind of hard, but early days, I had basically no work and I had to apply for unemployment and all of that. So, I was one of the lucky ones. I got some, it was pretty low, but I got some support. So, yeah,
wow,
it's been interesting.
I bet. And I'm assuming that you're coming to us from Boulder today. Is that right?
Yeah, well, Westminster, but yeah, pretty
Oh
close
yeah,
to Boulder. Yeah,
yeah, cool.
yeah.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, it's such a pleasure to get to know you better, Lindsay. I'm so
You.
happy that you're part of the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra. And thank you so much for sharing this music and your background with us tonight.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was my pleasure. Thanks.
Uh, Such a pleasure. Anything else that you want to share before we sign off?
Um, I don't think so.
All right.
Come to our concerts. Listen online.
Yeah. Yeah. What a great plug. Thank you so
Yeah,
much, Lindsay. And thank
thanks.
you to all of you who are tuning in and watching these virtual virtuosos. I know many of you actually don't watch them when they're first premiered live, but you come back and watch them later, and we're very happy that you do. Check out our website for additional information for upcoming concerts. I believe our next concert is November 14th, if I have the date right, featuring our woodwinds, brass, and percussion of the orchestra. We hope to see you there. And thanks again, Lindsay.
Bye.
Good
Thanks.
night. Bye.